Well, welcome and good evening. It's nice to see everyone with us tonight. I'm Mary Beth Gassman, and I am a professor at Rutgers University in the Graduate School of Education. And I also have the honor to serve as the executive director of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Institute for Leadership, Equity, and Justice. And it is our pleasure to co-sponsor this evening with Randall Westbrook, along with the Rutgers Graduate School of Education's Alumni Association. And just want to say welcome again. And at this point, I'm going to hand things off to the president of the Rutgers GSE Alumni Association, Marilyn Gagno. Marilyn, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Gassman. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Marilyn Gagno, president of the Graduate School of Education Alumni Association. And I too would like to welcome you to our very special program this evening. We're very honored to have with us Dr. Randall Westbrook. This is a highly significant program for us because Dr. Westbrook is a 2020 recipient of our Distinguished Service Award. This award is given only every 2 years, and it is given to an alum of the GSE who has been shown to give outstanding service not only to the field of education and to Rutgers and to the Graduate School of Education, but this person who is selected also has a true commitment of the highest level to the values that we uphold at the School of Education. He was nominated by colleagues, along with many other people, vetted, and obviously is one of our recipients. And so we're delighted to have him with us this evening. To introduce him is a member of our executive board, Dr. Patrick Noonan. Patrick earned his doctorate degree from Rutgers University. He is on the administrative staff at William Patterson University, and he is very actively involved as a member of the executive board of the Graduate School of Education Alumni Association. Patrick, the ball is all yours.
Thank you so much, Marilyn, and welcome everyone, Rutgers University alumni, guests, and friends of the university. It is such an honor and a privilege to be here tonight to interview my friend, colleague, mentor, and all-around great, fantastic human being, Dr. Randall Westbrook. Randall and I have known each other for a few years, I think like 30 or more, but we'll get into that. And we just want to have an informal conversation, talk about Randall's area of expertise, and we'll be taking questions at the end. Our colleague Brandy from the Proctor Institute will be monitoring questions. But if you have a light bulb moment that goes off, feel free to type that question in the chat along the way, and we'll try and get to that. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Randall Westbrook.
Great. Thank you very much, Patrick. And I want to say thank you to my friends and colleagues, Mary Beth Gassman, and her wonderful leadership at the Proctor Institute, and Brandy for being just the most, you can't even put it into words, right? It literally, words escape you when we start talking about how well she has put things together for us, and just the marvelous Brandy. We'll say it like that. I want to thank my friend Patrick Noonan, Dr. Patrick Noonan, and also, of course, Dr. Marilyn Gagno from the GSE Alumni Association. We have just finished honoring the most recent recipients of the Distinguished Scholar, the Distinguished Alum Award, for which, as was previously stated, I was one of the most recent recipients. And I want to thank the organization again for that. Patrick alluded to the fact that we've known each other for 30 years. It's actually 30, almost 31, right? He and I started work at Rutgers on the exact same day. we actually graduated from the GSE with our master's degrees on the same day. There is actually photographic evidence that we sat next to each other at graduation. Um, we and I had the privilege, the honor of serving on Patrick's dissertation committee. That was a blast. And we have some other stuff planned too, but we won't talk about that right now because we don't want to put it out in the atmosphere until we're ready to deal with it. I actually see the other person in the audience, if you will, that I had the honor to serve on her dissertation committee, Dr. Mantuano. And I see another one of my friends and colleagues. I'm going to do this real fast. I promise. Dr. Eileen Rosen. I actually still have a copy of her dissertation on my shelf. She asked me for it. She said, "Well, are you crazy? Who reads your dissertation?" I said, "I do for fun, you know." And of course,
It's true.
my mentee, Kevin Ewell, who I'm honored to be his mentor. And apparently that was Patrick's doing. So you see Patrick has a link to so much stuff. But at any rate, I digress and go on far too long. So I'll throw it back to Patrick to rescue all of you, including myself.
Yes. Okay, so a lot of love and respect for this man tonight. So we're just going to do our utmost to keep it on the up and up here. So Randall, we'll start off with a soft one. What is your background? You know, where did you grow up, and where did you attend school, college, wherever you want to take that question, in whatever direction. We'll start with that, and there's a second part to it after that.
All right, great. And I'm timing myself, I promise you all. Okay, I was educated in, first part of my public school education was in the public schools of Asbury Park, New Jersey. I tell a story about how I was on my way to school on the morning after Dr. King was assassinated, and that became a driving force for my desire to become a teacher because of the emotional connection that was made there. Graduated from Monmouth Regional High School, and in college I attended an MSI and HBCU, Livingstone College in Salisbury, North Carolina. That's where I discovered the power of Du Bois's work, and found out that Du Bois had a unique connection to the founding of Livingstone. Livingstone is also an institution that was founded by the president of Rutgers. So we have that by the great grandson, not founded by, I'm sorry, presided over by the great grandfather of the current president at Rutgers. So we've got that connection. Master's degree was completed at Rutgers in sociology of ed. Doctorate was philosophical foundations of ed, and dealing both with history. So it ended up being very social science centric, and that's sort of how the love for trying to deal with those research questions about how does the social fabric connect us all, you know, in terms of these intellectual pursuits, and that's how all of that actually got started.
Okay, excellent. So you've already started to allude to some of those factors with sociology and philosophy and your background in that. Can you talk about your professional career and how those themes of sociology and you've talked about Dr. King, and we also know that you're a Paul Robeson scholar as well. So talk about those contexts in terms of your professional career and your current role in higher ed.
Okay, well, I'll start with the first part first, right? When we engage in intellectual investigation, right, better known as that, you know, daunted R word, research, you know, a lot of times we get ourselves caught up into what words portend rather than what they actually mean at its most elemental sense, right? Research, as I say, is looking up stuff. that you need or that you want, right? So from a practical perspective, there is no discernible difference between trying to find out where the next, where there is a, a Domino's pizza restaurant, from trying to find out the, pedagogical implications of a given structure within teaching and learning. And I was always curious about that, right? Because that's where research begins, curiosity. So as an undergrad, I started with that. And then when I graduated from college, and I was thinking about this, I've been out of college. I mean, this is I'm about to complete the 41st anniversary of my freshman year in college. That's actually 42nd anniversary of my freshman year in college. That's how I look at it, right? And from that time to the day, I've spent less than 23 months away from a college, right? So I worked in admissions, and all the while that I was in admissions, I was always that odd guy who always wanted to know stuff, who wanted to learn stuff, right? And sometimes because of the job, and sometimes in spite of it. So in 1999, right? I left Rutgers University after 9 years there, and went to Fairleigh Dickinson. And I went there with the understanding, with the promise that even though I was going as director of undergraduate admissions, my goal was to become a faculty member. And driving down the highway and got a phone call from the School of Ed and said, listen, we have an opening, would you be interested? And I said, sure, because that's why I came here. And I got there, and again, I was sort of that odd guy, right? The guy who likes to talk about research. What about pedagogy? Well, yeah, you still have to research. Well, what about curriculum and instruction? You still have to research. It always comes back to research, and that's my professional background. People have actually said to me, are you sure you want to teach that class? You can teach something else. I mean, why? Why would you want to have a job where people, why wouldn't I want to have a job where people need to know stuff and want to know stuff and need somebody to help them know it? And so that's kind of how I got to this place, right? Because it always comes down to, I want to know how to do something. I want to know something about something, but I'm scared, right?
Right.
I'm apprehensive.
Right.
So a mission evolves out of this stuff, right? Because we train people to be afraid of research. Research is the most natural thing that we do because it grows out of curiosity, and curiosity is the most natural thing we do. So why wouldn't I want to be the person who leads you to that, right? One of the root words for education, right, actually means to lead someone from one place to another. So that's how I see it. And that's been the centerpiece of my work for the better part of 20 years, just helping people find out stuff that they want to know.
Absolutely. It's kind of almost my next question. And for the many of us on this Zoom session tonight who know you and have the pleasure of knowing you and working with you over the years, you are a highly sought after speaker. You are a highly sought after adjunct professor. We know routinely every semester you're asked to teach many, many classes that you cannot at other places. And that's because of your passion, and that's because of your dedication. I always tell a story that when we were getting our master's degree together, that one of my not so favorite professors was a professor of philosophy who will remain nameless. But I used to get some naps in during that class. But there was one student in the room who could go toe to toe with Professor Chambliss, who was amazing and one of the smartest men I've ever met. And that was that was Randall, that was you. And I even think Dr. Chambliss walked away saying, and there was always a great exchange of minds and intellect there. So what fuels that passion for helping others and inspiring others and getting to the why? Where does that come from?
Honestly, right? When you look at this, right, and you think about how people how people put together, thoughts about learning and teaching, right? You get them sort of almost from people that you've been around, right? So if you've been around people who encouraged curiosity, who encouraged pursuits, right? That will feed you, because what happens is once you find out that they're not monsters, right? That the pursuit of this information is not a monster, you want to embrace it, right? So when you learn that at a very early age, right? When you say, hey, what's that book? What does this word mean? Go look it up. What's this concept? What is this? Does this? You find out, you look it up, and on your way to looking it up, it feeds you. So that's kind of the genesis of that, right? But if you keep talking about it, and if you keep pursuing these lines of inquiry, right? This is when it gets really important, because as you learn about it, right? On your way to learning about it, you find out something, right? Let's go back to the example of there's no practical difference between learning of, trying to find out where Domino's is versus someplace else, right? On your way to Domino's, you go past a sneaker store that has a really interesting pair of sneakers in it. On your way to Domino's, you go past a restaurant that looks kind of nice, that you say, oh my God, this is elegant. Maybe one night I may stop in here when I'm not dressed in my COVID inspired sweatpants and I got on actual real clothes, right? So what do you find out on the way to finding out what you were to get to what you were seeking? And that's fun, right? So if you can remind people of that, right? If you can show people that, because that's always been my experience, that on my way to learning stuff that I was quote unquote supposed to learn, I found out something else that I wasn't supposed to learn, right?
Right.
That's how I found out about Du Bois, right? The Du Bois's connection to Livingstone, right? That's how I found out, about Sam Proctor, right? While I was, I'm looking up stuff about Sam Proctor, and I'm realizing, hey, right? He didn't just mentor Dr. King. When Dr. King came to Crozer as a first year, and he was a middler, right? He mentored Jesse Jackson, and he mentored Doug Wilder, the first Black governor of a southern state after Reconstruction. He was friends with Sergeant Shriver. So I'm sitting next to this guy, right? Basically, 20 something years ago, the weekend of Tiger Woods winning his first Masters. And I'm saying, he's giving me advice. He gave all these guys advice. He was generous with them. And now he's giving me advice, right? So it's hard to not be passionate when you realize that the people who helped you along the way did that selflessly, right? As a mentor, I keep going back to the analogies, and I'm going to stop, I promise. Somebody's and two kids are in the sandbox, and one of the kids loses one of their toys. And the other kid says, man, if I help you find this toy, we can both play with it. Yes, let's find it. Boom. That's research. Get your hands in the dirt. Pull out. Oh my God, we found the toy. Now we can play. Do you understand how much fun that is? Think about research that way. And I promise you that you'll feel that same way about research. And so how can you not? When you said to me, Patrick, that you wanted to write a dissertation about the development of Essex County College, the first thing I said was, oh my God, I can't wait to read that. And I still talk about it. Nicole, when I read your dissertation, your next to last draft, about Temple University. I still talk about it. I was actually talking about the intersection of religion and politics and money in terms of higher education. And I used your dissertation as an example. I do that because it connects. I found you were looking for something in the sandbox, and we dug in the sand until we found it, and boom. How can you not get excited about that?
Absolutely. And I see Nicole, and I see our colleague Debbie Epting here, and some others that know you and know that that's how you are. And it's by your genuine compassion, the way that others have helped you along the way. You so want to give back, and you give that to your students. And that's why many of your classes are closed, because so many students are trying to get into your class. So it caps out, and then they can't take it because you're such a sought after professor, because of it just flows from you, and we are all the better for it.
Thank you. Thank you. They also
So-
make me smarter too. Listen, again, 42nd anniversary of my freshman year. That's 2 lifetimes ago for a college freshman. I haven't thought like a college freshman since the 70s. So if I'm in the presence of somebody who's thinking about what it means to be 17, 18, 19 years old, writing a paper, even if they're repeating something from, it's their perspective that feeds me. Now I can't ever sound totally hip, but I can sound hip enough to have a certain level of credibility. So why wouldn't I want that if I'm sitting in the classroom with them as the old man?
Absolutely. And even when I was writing my dissertation, and I can't speak for Nicole when I'm going to try to, but I know for me, and I'm sure it was for her as well, that we learned together. Like, we weren't putting something together to submit it to you for your approval. You'd be like, Pat, let's talk about this, or have you thought about that? And then it went off in another direction. It was in the same highway, but it might have been taking a different exit, and we were learning together. And I think that's what so many students, doctoral students, graduate students want in their professor, and that's what they have in you. But enough of the love fest. We're going to go on to the next question. You alluded to W.E.B. Du Bois, and you alluded to, well, I alluded to Paul Robeson. Can you talk about either one or both of their legacies and their importance to the American story and relevance to today's learners? And given everything that's going on in the world today as well, we'll open that door as well.
Sure. You know, when I talk about Paul Robeson, right? Paul Robeson, a son of Rutgers, right? And I talk about him, and a lot of people, they paint these flowery stories about Robeson, and basically it's like, literally riding on his coattails as I see it. It's not, Paul was tolerated until they realized how amazing he was, and then he was loved. They almost killed him when he tried out for the football team. And then when they realized that they couldn't kill him, then they said, oh, well, we've got a great classmate. He was only allowed to live on campus one of the semesters, right? And when I was researching that, I found out that there were limits on different ethnic groups about who could actually live on campus. I actually found out that one of the administrators who was on campus while you and I were still working at Rutgers was president of the student body, and actually voted to continue to prohibit certain ethnic groups from living on campus. But his vote on that is how they ended up sort of easing it, because it was like, well, okay, we can let 10 on this semester, we can let 20 on next semester, and so forth. Wow. Right? Again, that's the things we learn on the way to learning things. But Robeson, turning being tolerated into being regarded, respected, and loved was a process. Right? And Du Bois took note of that process. Okay, Du Bois started his academic career at Fisk University because the people who supported his education would not support him going to a predominantly white college because they thought it was a bad look for them to send him there. These were the white benefactors. And so he went to Fisk and he graduated from Fisk, and then he went to Harvard and got another bachelor's and a master's. And then he went to Europe and studied at the University of Berlin, which was the most prestigious institution in the world at that time. And he finished the dissertation, but the group who was giving him money thought better of it, for the same reasons that Du Bois was talked out of trying to get into Harvard right out of high school and talked out of going to Williams College right up the road from where he lived. Those the same sentiments were at play when they told him that they ran out of money to allow him to stay one more semester to finish his doctorate. So he came back to his safety school and got his doctorate. The safety school happened to be Harvard. Now, here we are, right? We're 130 years away from Du Bois having completed his doctorate, 125 years from him completing his doctorate. When Black people were being killed for trying to learn their ABCs, and this man was earning a doctorate at his safety school, at his fallback school. So you think about the enormity of that. Robeson and Du Bois became friends, right? Because they needed each other. They had a lot in common, right? Loss and, being tolerated before they were regarded, before they were respected, before they were loved. So when we start talking about these issues of race and social class and turmoil, Du Bois wrote about this. Okay, Du Bois wrote about Black men being killed by police in the 1880s when he was when he was a teenager. He talked about voting initiatives that white citizens in Tennessee were voting for and trying to trick Black voters into voting, and it was going to marginalize them. When he was 15, he talked about a governor who encouraged the Black voters to support a prison, and then the prison was going to be filled with Black bodies. And he talked against that. At 16, he talked about this. So when we look at Du Bois now, right, 16 going forward 130 years later, and we're watching the prison industrial complex, and we're watching the Black Lives Matter movement, and we're talking about how what is the role of art as it relates as a political force, right? I care not a damn, said Du Bois in 1926, about any art that doesn't promote a sense of pride, that doesn't promote a sense of responsibility, right? So, and Du Bois and Robeson, the epitaph that's on his gravestone, I had to either I chose to be an artist, right? With a voice. I'm paraphrasing him, yeah. Am I going to be an artist of substance who expects things, or am I just going to be a performer? I had no choice. I had no alternative. I had to be someone who used my voice and made a difference. So when you talk about that, right, what is the responsibility of the artist? What is the responsibility of the athlete? What is the responsibility of the intellectual leaders? Are we advancing society, or are we holding society back by not holding them responsible? Du Bois and Robeson, that was their common thread. They talked about this. They talked about this type of stuff the way that you and I talk about admissions trends and stuff. They were that was the depth of their friendship, and they talked about it their whole lives,
Absolutely. Before we get into the next question, I figured I would check in with Miss Brandy and see if we have any questions at this point, or can we keep going?
You can keep going.
Okay. All right, we get the green light from the boss. Okay, so we started to talk about again, some of the movements that have been going on, the Black Lives Matter, the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others, the divisiveness of what's going on in the country today. With all of that, Randall, let's talk about, I mean, you've talked about several things just now about the role of art and intellect, as well as commitment to ethics. Let's talk about the role of philosophy and the role of the lens of the historian, particularly, you know, again, this stuff is happening now, but what do you think, how do you think that lens of history is currently affecting today's events, and how do you think that might play out in the future?
Yeah. You know, I think that when we look at history, right, when we look at philosophy, and we're talking about, you know, love of knowledge, right? For what purpose, right? Literally, love of knowledge, philosophy. And we talk about history, right? And how do we look at what happened yesterday to help us chart a better tomorrow, right? I heard this analogy of building a plane while it's in flight, right? You know, and it's part of the human experience that things that happen to us today, unless we have a keen eye on history, we can't even process that it happened also yesterday, you know, that it happened last week, last month, last year, last century. So, you know, having an eye on history, particularly when it relates to civil unrest, ain't no new thing, right? And there is no such new thing. Every time, and this is how we should be processing civil unrest. Philosophy and history. The guiding principles, right? One of the things that we have to understand is that people who oppress, that's their job. At least they see it that way. That is their being. That makes them who they are, right? When you take a bully, when you defang a bully, right? If the bully walks up to you and engages you, they realize that you're not as much of a threat to them as they thought you were, right? Well, history tells us that too. What is my guiding principle as a bully is that I got to beat you up so that I can feel more powerful. I have to push you down so that I can lift myself up. I have to hate you so that I can love myself. And you try to explain to people that you need more room, that it actually doesn't work that way. That's why hate is so difficult, right? Hate can't be fed. So the more you hate somebody, the more you need to hate somebody else in order for you to eventually, and it to the point where it eats up your own ability to love yourself. Conversely speaking, if you love yourself, right, you can't love. That's why I'm so insatiable about research, right? Because I keep loving to find out more stuff so that I can make these linkages. But when we talk about it, right, from an historical perspective, we have to remember that it ain't no new thing. Forward, right? Du Bois did a march in 1918 called a silent march, where people walked down the street with signs and no one spoke. And it was an outrageously beautiful thing. Men all dressed in black suits, children dressed in white, women all dressed in white, blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks of people down the center of the street in New York. And it was seen by many people as a threat. Well, a couple years before that, the Klan marched in front of the White House. And the president claimed that, well, I didn't invite them. well, A, you didn't disinvite them, and B, when they got here, you didn't turn them back around. So by your absence of action, you actually did invite them. We also don't forget that a couple years before that, you called Birth of a Nation, which had a movie that had white actors in blackface getting lynched. And in the movie, people would get to a certain part of that movie and they would leave the theater in the middle of the movie, go into the black sections of town and kill black folks because of the images that they saw, right? So when we start thinking about this violence and violence that gets allowed from the highest levels of authority, right? And we see this stuff, we know that history and that the ability to not remember history with the accompanying curse of repeating it, right? That came from George Santayana, who was one of Du Bois's teachers. That phrase, those who do not remember history are condemned to repeat it. The weirdest teacher, so-called at Harvard, who became friends with Du Bois because Du Bois was the so-called weirdest student at Harvard.
Right.
That was his philosophy teacher. So yes, there is a connection. So when we see these incidents, right, with Ahmaud Arbery, who had the gall to be running down the street for a morning jog, he's trying to keep himself in shape, and someone thinks that it's okay, well, let's kill him because he might not be guilty, but he sure looks like somebody who was guilty. That's how Sam Hose got lynched, and then they put his knuckles in the butcher shop to show that this is what we do to people who run in the wrong place. So we gotta remember this stuff.
So Randall, if I may, for me, it begs the question. We're going back to 1880. You're citing, and the person you just cited, those who don't know history are dared to, if they don't know about it, they're doomed to repeat it.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't seem to be learning. We don't seem to be learning anything from 1880 to the 1960s and everything in between, 1918, all of those great examples you gave us. How come? Is it because the bully constantly keeps coming back? The racist, the bully.
No.
How come we're not learning? I guess going back to that.
I think that one of the biggest problems is that we keep thinking that they go away and come back. There's no compelling reason to leave because
they never leave.
Because they're never unwelcome, right? But it's okay. 1880s and then the 1890s and then the 1900s and then the 1910s and the 1920s and the 1930s, right? And you look at this stuff because listen, oppression sells. I mean, I hate to, I don't want to get too cynical about this stuff, but I mean, oppression really sells, but so too does opposition to oppression, right? Those are the two selling forces, right? So when you hear somebody shouting derisive comments and somebody shouts back, she persisted. Okay, it lasts for a little while until the next time, right? So here's the trick. It keeps happening because you've got these two opposing forces. I don't want to get too crazy deep about this, but how we resist, every time you resist, you can't just shout. You have to sing, right? A shout is an expectoration of sound. A song lasts longer. So you can't just shout opposition. You gotta sing opposition, right? Because songs last longer. Like a shout is just boom, God, right? But a song, right, lasts longer and people listen, right? Do you know babies dance before they learn how to walk? Babies sing before they learn how to talk. And if we treat them right, they never stop. They never stop dancing, they never stop singing. We have to continue to move with the rhythm of love. We have to continue to sing instead of expectorating sounds of opposition. And we can do that because we know that it works. We know that it works because it's research. We looked it up. And on our way to finding it out, that's how we stayed. So we just have to keep doing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Last one, before I go back to Miss Brandy again. What do you think the historians are going to say about this time in 60, 80, 100 years? That's if there's still paper and pen. Maybe there won't be. But what do you think? I mean, just thinking forward. And that'll be my last question of the night before we go to questions from the audience. Randall, what do you think our historians will say in the future about this time? Do you think talking about dancing and singing and it all went away and never came back? What do you think?
No, they're going to look at this time, and they're going to realize that I mean, I don't know. Hopefully, they'll see. It's almost like 100-year cycle, right? 1915 to 1924, we had inveterate racism at the highest forms of government. We had corruption at the highest forms of government. We had race riots at the highest form of government. And people said, this is awful. We got to figure out a way out of this. And, then we had a boom of the stock market. And then a few years after that, we had a crash. Okay. And people were poor and sad and held on to each other until such time that they got enough to be able to separate back again and start shouting again. Okay, so here we are in the 2000s, and we had a period of time where we had almost unimaginable corruption and a resurgence of almost unimaginable hate and anger, right? And the stock market is breaking a record again for the 5th straight day. One of the major markets broke a record, right? So maybe in another 5 years, although I hope not, we'll have a depression, right? You go back 100 years before the 1900s, and you go back where you had an inveterate racism and genocide, right, and corruption, right, and you had a vice president actually kill somebody in the street. You move forward 40 years, you had a congressman almost beat another congressman to death over the enslavement of peoples of African descent. And the congressman continued to serve, and the other congressmen healed and fought slavery. So what are we going to say 20, 40, 60, 80 years from now? We're going to talk about this, and we're going to see it as that time. And people are going to say, it will pass. And what I hope they'll say is, it passed, but it cannot, right? It cannot be allowed to just pass so that it will recur, right? That's what I'm hoping that historians will say. Now, whether or not they say it, we can only hope. But if we educate, if we encourage students to research this stuff, the questions, right? From the movie Oliver, where is love, right? If we ask that question and then we go to seek it, what will we see on the way to finding love, right?
Right.
That's what I'm hoping will happen.
That's very optimistic, and I share that with you, brother. I hope absolutely you're right, and I certainly want to believe in that, and I think that's the world many of us want to believe in. So I thank you for this thrill of a lifetime for me to be able to interview you as one of the greatest humans that I know, and one of the smartest humans that I know. And I just want to say thank you.
He's so overly generous. Seriously, The check's already in the mail, my brother. You're good. You're good. Thank you so much.
Wait a minute, it's 2021, Randall. It's gotta be Venmo or PayPal.
Hey, look, I don't do that type of stuff, man. I don't do that type of stuff.
There you
I
go.
deal on cash and carry. I'm old school.
There you go. Okay, so we're going to go to our colleague Brandy, who's going to go to the questions section and take it away, Brandy.
Sure. So I have a question. It's a bit long, but it's in the spirit of optimism. So when we think about philosophy and history and other social science and humanities disciplines, how do we encourage the next generation of students, our future leaders, to embrace the value of these disciplines when all of the attention is drawn to the practical and professional disciplines? It harkens back to the Du Bois and Washington classical versus vocational training debate. In short, what are your thoughts on how to embrace and promote liberal education?
I actually had a conversation with a student this afternoon who said, Dr. Westbrook, should I shift my major so it'll give me a better chance of getting a job? And I said to him, what happens if you get it? Right? Because we don't think about that, right? I want to get a job, but do you want to be the miserable person at your job, right? And he was trying to get a teaching job, but he said, oh, I'm not really interested in this, but maybe I'll do this because I got a better chance of getting hired. And I said, man, mess around with your luck, you'll get hired. And then that's what's going to happen. You're going to be that teacher that, because I don't know when I'll retire soon, but, I'm planning on living to be about 100 and I want to outpace Du Bois. I'm planning on living to be at least like 120 something. So I don't know when I'm going to retire. But what happens if you get the job? Right? You can chase the money, but if you don't love the job, you're going to spend up all that money on therapy and booze. Right? And he laughed and he said, yeah, I really don't like that area. I said, then don't go into it. I said, what do you really love? And he told me what he loved. And I said, plus you want to be a coach. I said, you're not going to have time to be a coach if you do that other stuff. And he thought for a couple seconds. He says, yeah, you're right. All right, I got to go tell my mom that I talked to you about it. And she told me that I'm going to tell her advice was bad. I'm like, well, no, I don't quite put it that way, right? We can chase people away from these pursuits by simply reminding them about how much misery there is found in just trying to chase the dollars as opposed to chasing the dream, right? Liberal education actually teaches you stuff. The Masters is on TV right now. I was in a room talking to one of my dad. My dad owned a business and we were talking and they were asking, what were you majoring in? And I was telling them all the stuff I was majoring in. He said, what are you ever gonna do with that? I said, man, I'm smart. I said, give me the manual to your office on a Friday. I said, I'll come in and do an interview. I'll be smarter than your vice president because I know how to read stuff. And then I said to him, I said, listen. And he looked over, he saw my dad had a putter and I said, and he said, oh my God, look at this putter. This is beautiful. And he gripped it. I said, oh my God, look at that grip. I said, you're gonna put every ball into the lake, even if there's no water. And he started laughing. He said, what would you recommend? And I showed him how to improve his grip. I said, now swing the club. And he swung it. He said, wow, where'd you learn that? I said, oh man, just some liberal education junk that I just put together. And he laughed, right? The stuff that we learn on the way to learning stuff is what's stuff. And that's what I say to my students. You see what you did to me, Brandy? You said it was a long question. So as soon as you said that, that put in my mind, long answer. It ain't the stuff that we learn. It's the other stuff, right? Go to a job interview. 80 people at the job, they all look same on paper, they look exactly like you. What is different about you is almost always a vestige of liberal education. That's what makes the difference. The business major who likes the Yankees is going to get a job for a Yankee fan. Okay, I went into a job and I see a Boston Red Sox banner in the office. I better learn to talk about Ted Williams and Nomar Garciaparra and leave Derek Jeter and Babe Ruth alone. That's liberal education. We can sell that.
All right. Oh,
Yeah. So there's another question. How can we assess the effectiveness of activism?
We can measure the effects of activism by how many more people want to think about it, talk about it, and also be active. We can measure it by how people's language changes when they talk about activism, right? Black Lives Matter. A lot of people didn't want to talk about Black Lives Matter 2 years ago, 3 years ago. They were concerned that it might sound too volatile, until a police officer decided to use a man's neck as a kneeling bench, as a prayer bench. Until a young man jogged, until a young African American woman lay in her bed sleep, and oops, it was an accident. And now, there are people who 3 years ago did not think about wanting to be a part of this movement, and now they want to be a part of it. So I think that if we keep our activism at the front, and we know that we're doing it for the right reasons, we'll know we're successful by how many people want to join us. But we'll also know how successful we are by how many people oppose us as well. Because every time somebody, equal and opposite reaction, Einstein's theory of relativity, right? For every act of love, somebody's out there trying to figure out another act of hate. That's why we got 43 states with new voting laws, trying to shut down voting, because we can't let folks who love vote. We can't let folks who vote outdo us.
So I think we have time for 2 more questions. So Du Bois was a social critic. He wasn't pragmatic in his approach. He never compromised. Do you think that he could have achieved more as a pragmatist, or is he better as a social critic?
Well, he was, according to what pragmatism actually was, he was more of a pragmatist than folks think. It's possible to actually be both, right? It's not binary, right? Cornel West lists Du Bois as one of the cornerstones of pragmatism. And the reason that he does that is because, remember, I mentioned George Santayana, right? Those who fail to remember history are condemned to repeat it. That was one of his philosophy teachers, right? But his other one was one of the founders of pragmatism. The one who said to him, you don't major in philosophy, major in history, because people hate philosophers and you'll never find a job. So Du Bois's choice to become an historian, as opposed to becoming a professional philosopher, was in itself a pragmatic decision. It's possible to chase pragmatic aims while still being critical of society, because the two are not mutually exclusive. They are intertwined, right? It may not be pragmatic for me to do this today, but I can criticize, I can think critically about it and figure out how much of it I can do today and how much of it I can do tomorrow. And so I think I answered the question. I think I did, but I got so caught up talking about Du Bois and his pragmatism. This is what happens when you ask a guy. And I got one more thing I want to say when you finish the next question. I want to tell you a funny linked story. So please, I'm ready for the next question.
Sure. In 2021, in COVID pandemic America, what is the role of access and equity when it comes to race and education?
Questions about race and education never really go away in a country that is still struggling with its original sin, right? And any other thing that you bring into the social equation, okay, and in 2021, it happens to be COVID, right? But I'll quote Du Bois again. The race is to be led by its exceptional. You need access. Okay. You need access to the education, and the education allows you to be able to articulate on different levels. Right? So for those underserved and for those who struggle to get access, we need to embrace that, because the more that you give access to the people who historically and traditionally have not been given it, the easier it's going to be to resolve some of these social problems. So access, race and equity are central to this, right? As we, if we look at this, that the least, the people who get the least in society are the people who are suffering right now the most, but it's having a radiating effect on society, right? If you gave the COVID vaccine to the poorest 10% of the people tomorrow, this is your line, go get your shot. You could reduce COVID. Now, I'm just saying, I'm not a scientist, but I'm presuming, right? Because we know what happens. If we can educate people who have traditionally been denied education and give them the credibility to go back to these poorer, underserved communities, we can start heading off this current difficulty at the pass. So yes, it's all related. Equity and access relative to race and education ought not ever have been at the bottom of the list. But it is, and it still is. And those of us who are here today, that can be part of our responsibility. And my guess is it probably is for many of us who are here. Remember when I was talking about the things that we see on the way to see something else? I just want to let you know that I would exclude all the insensitive references to it, but I used to talk about and to think that despite all of its difficulties and its insensitive language, this is what I would actually say. We have to look at and to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street by Dr. Seuss, right? We take out those racial and ethnic insensitivities. What did we see on the way from point A to point B that got us there? And when someone says we did nothing, we did a lot of stuff. We saw, we made discoveries, right? I don't use that reference anymore. I got to come up with another one. But this is what we see, and I urge all of us to think about it like that and approach education and life that way. Brandy, I turn it back over to you and to Dr. Gagnon and to Dr. Gassman. I think I'm done.
Randall, thank you so very much. I'm just going to jump in here because I would just want everyone who is attending to recognize how outstanding a person, educator, and scholar you are, and how you have been so deserving of our Distinguished Service Award. And for those of you who may not be familiar with our award, I did say briefly that it is given once every 2 years, but to see the prestige of this award, it was initially given in 1959. And though we have had over 16,000 graduates from the Graduate School of Education, only 150 people have been so honored to receive this very prestigious award, and Dr. Westbrook is one of those. So we really congratulate you as a true scholar and who so proud that we can say you are from the GSE. And I'd also like to give a shout out to our friends who have joined us from the Rutgers African American Alliance, who are with us this evening. And with that, I turn the program back over to either Patrick or Brandy.
Thank you. So I would just like to echo, Marilyn, what you shared, and thank Randall for this insightful kind of discussion. And I'd also like to thank Patrick too for leading this interview. It was truly inspiring learning from both of you. And I'm super excited to see kind of the work that you continue to do. I also like to thank the Rutgers University Graduate School of Education, Alumni Association, and Marilyn Gagnon. just for co-sponsoring this important event with us and giving us the opportunity to kind of learn more about this particular topic. And then finally, I'd just like to thank all of the attendees for joining. We will definitely be recording this event and sharing the recording within the next week. So we'll definitely be in touch. But if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to just reach out to us, and we're happy to answer those questions. And then just thank you, everyone. And I hope everyone has a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Cool.
Bravo to
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Patrick, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.